Hello everybody and welcome to part 25 of Kerbal Space Program. The journey continues. We start today by launching one of our Brunel Mark 1 rockets from the KSC, bound for our space station Socrates, aiming to continue our construction of the latest addition to our fleet of interplanetary craft. Corkin Kerman is in command for this one, and he is joined by our scientist Gwenby and our engineer Dottie, and we are in a bit of a race against time to get this new vehicle constructed. The Galileo arrives back from its mission to Moho in a little under 30 days time, and once it does so, the frame rate in and around the Socrates space station is just going to go straight to hell. So we need to get this thing finished and possibly get it away from the space station before that happens, so that that doesn't happen. We've got a pretty big fairing on the rocket today, but it's still a pretty light payload. Well, I mean, light compared to some of the stuff we've been taking up. Nowhere near the lifting capability of this Brunel Mark 1 rocket. Underneath this fairing then we have the power module for our new craft. It also contains some reaction wheels because this craft is going to be big and heavy and difficult to control, so we need all the help we can get. Now I'm not entirely sure what we're going to be doing with this craft in the long run. We know it's going to Eve, it will probably be going out to Joule, maybe even beyond, so we can't rely on solar power at those distances, so we will be using a nuclear reactor. As we arrive at the space station, our Kerbals can begin their manoeuvres to attach this latest component to the end of our rapidly developing interplanetary vehicle. I'm using the most basic reactor which comes with KSP Interstellar for this one, KSP Interstellar being one of the mods I'm using for this playthrough. We could have gone for something a bit more advanced, a bit more powerful, but we don't really need it, and those would have been much heavier, so as we're trying to get as much Delta V out of this craft as is possible, this seemed like the ideal choice. Now, there's not really anything else for our Kerbals to do once they've attached that part. This is very much a sort of get in and get out kind of mission. So with that done, our Kerbals begin to make their way back home. Now, the reactor we've just added to our craft is an all-in-one reactor. The more advanced reactors you can get with KSP Interstellar require a separate reactor and a thermal power converter. Because we're using a nuclear reactor, we will of course need to bulk up on our radiators, but that will be coming with future components. On our descent, I am once again trying to land our command module as close as possible to the KSC, and having made a little bit of a calibration run at the end of the last episode, I try what I think will work this time around, and well, we're not far off. We get pretty damn close, not far off the shoreline, but we can adjust that and work that down a bit more in future missions. Our Kerbals splash down safely just off the shores of the KRC, probably close enough to swim in, but we don't have enough time to be messing about with that. The Galileo draws ever closer, and we have a lot more components for our new craft to get up into orbit. Next up then, we are launching another one of our Brunel Mark 1 rockets with the latest addition to our collection of stupid-looking fairings. Once again, it's a bulky payload but a relatively light one, so we don't really need a bigger rocket, but yeah, that fairing. Tom Kerman is in command for this one, and he is joined by Jeblov and Dottie. Dottie there on her second consecutive mission. We don't have any other engineers at the moment. We may have to go and recruit some because Dottie's a tough little cookie, but I'm sure we'll wear her out soon enough. Today's mission is to deliver a largely structural part to our new vehicle, although there are some reaction wheels on there as well, just to help along with that side of things. For this, I'm using some of the parts from Near Future Construction, another one of the main mods for this series. I'm using the Octogirder parts from that, which are very handy, but if you start adding nodes or attachment points, it tends to necessitate these quite silly-looking fairings if you're launching them on a 2.5 metre rocket. Arriving in orbit then, and we can get our first look at our new component, and this is going to sort of act as a structural bridge. Up until now, the new craft has been constructed much in the way the previous craft have been, the Ptolemy and the Galileo, a sort of a single long cylindrical section, but we're going to need to do more than that if we are to go to, well, to get a heavy payload to Eve and to get any kind of payload out to Joule and possibly even further than that. Having rendezvoused with the space station, we start to bring this next component into place on the rear of our new interplanetary vehicle. I have to take extra special care to make sure this isn't at all wonky because it's got a lot of width to it, so if I don't line it up properly, it's going to show. But no, that goes well, and we have our little structural bridge attached, and things are looking good for our new interplanetary craft. Whilst we're up here, we also take the opportunity just to fill up the tanks of one of the space tugs attached to our space station. Last episode we did a mission where we used one of the space tugs and I forgot to refuel it, so we're just going to do that refueling now. Their objectives complete, then Tommel and Co can start to make their way back down to the surface. Yeah, they're very functional, very minimalist missions we're doing in this episode, but that is just, as I said, to try and get this thing flyable. We do have a little bit of wiggle room with the arrival of the Galileo, but nowhere near as much as I would like, so yeah, we need to get that done. With the fires of re-entry out of the way, our Kerbals come down pretty much exactly where they did last time, and they splash down safely just off the coast by the KSC. But once again, we've got no time to hang about. We've got more to do. So for our third mission, we make the switch to the Brunel Mark II, and an altogether more sensible looking fairing. Corkin, Gwemby and Dotty are back for this one. Having brought up that structural component last mission, it's about time we start attaching some stuff to it, and it's about time we start bringing up a lot more fuel, because we are going to need a ton of the stuff. Underneath the fairing then, we have one of the large 36-ton liquid fuel tanks which we are going to attach to the rear of that structural bridge. It will be the first of three. This one's just a fairly ordinary one. It's got some manoeuvring thrusters, the relevant docking ports and some little ladder sections, but it's basically just a fuel tank. The other two I'm bringing up will be a little bit different. Once we've attached these three tanks, our new vehicle will have a fuel capacity exceeding that of either the Ptolemy or the Galileo, but we can't stop there. The heavy payload, the Delta V demands, no, we're going to have to push on to even bigger stuff than that. Once in orbit, our crew begins the relatively involved process of freeing the payload from the stack and making sure that we don't leave any space junk behind before we can start to press on towards the space station. Also, fortunately for us, this payload does have some manoeuvring thrusters attached to it, which should make the whole job easier, because if this was just one block of 36 tons without anything like that, this would be interesting to try and manoeuvre into place. As it is, though, we arrive at the space station without any such concerns, although we do arrive in darkness, so we wait it out a little bit until we have daylight, and now we can begin our operations to get this thing attached. First of all, we need to get rid of that little docking adapter on the other end of our payload, so we dock everything to the space station's primary docking port before leaving the docking adapter behind and manoeuvring this fuel tank to the central port of the three on the rear of our new craft. Yeah, I do have to say I'm really liking the way this craft is starting to look now, particularly, as I was saying earlier, with that new structural component, giving it a little bit of width. But anyway, now unencumbered by a heavy payload, it's a relatively simple task for us to go and pick up that docking port again before our crew, their job done, can start to make their way back down to Kerbin. On the way down, I'm still trying to adjust things, still trying to experiment with things, still trying to close the distance between our landing spot and the KSC down to 0. This time it doesn't work out so well. We land further away than our previous two attempts, but we don't have any time to dwell on that. We've got stuff we really need to be cracking on with. We waste no time in blasting off once again from the KSC. Tommel, Jeblov and Dotty take their turn. Dotty must be exhausted by now. We really do need to think about getting another engineer. Having brought up that central fuel tank in our last mission, now it's time to bring up the two that will sit either side of it, and we start with the right-hand fuel tank, which is currently hidden by that fairing. This one will contain a couple of extras. It contains two of the large radiator panels. It also contains one of those Kerbal inventory system container attachment points, which I meant to put somewhere else on the craft, but I kind of forgot when I was making the relevant components. But, well, no harm done. Now, I could have put a pair of those large radiator panels on the central tank, but inevitably those radiators would have clipped through each other at some point, and I don't like the way that looks when two parts of the same craft clip through each other. It just looks wrong for some reason to me, so I try and avoid it if I'm designing a craft. Now, the order in which I'm building this craft isn't entirely arbitrary. Well, I mean, it can't be entirely arbitrary because you've got to attach, one bit after the other. But beyond that, I'm trying to sort of race to the engines before I get anything else done, because that will mean that we can actually get this craft away from the space station if it's needed. And if we've got a bit more time, then we can just attach a few more components at our leisure. But yeah, the frame rate around the space station is already starting to suffer a little bit. Once we arrive at the space station, we can begin the same routine we performed last time, getting rid of that superfluous docking adapter, getting this tank attached to the right-hand side of our craft, and for some reason I retracted my left-hand solar panel, thinking it was going to crash into that central tank, whereas the tank we're docking is as long as that one, so there was never any danger of that happening, so I don't know where my head was at for this one. Anyway, we get the tank attached without any real difficulties, and yeah, it's starting to take shape now. We go and retrieve that spare docking port from the space station's primary docking port, and then we can start to make our way home. We make some more adjustments from last time on our descent, still trying to hit that bullseye, but having overshot the mark so many times, it's even more frustrating when we come up short. But nonetheless, we do get a soft-ish landing on Kerbin's grasslands, and from here there's still a couple of more things I want to do today before we draw this episode to a close. We can't really leave today just having taken up 2 of those tanks. We kind of need to complete the set, so we are blasting off once again from the KSC with another one of our Brunel Mark II rockets, this time with the left-hand fuel tank under that fairing. Basically, it's the same as the right-hand fuel tank, only with the container attachment point on the other side. Anyway, Corkin, Kerman and Gwenby are back for this one, and they are joined by our brand new engineer, our new recruit, Barbus Kerman. Welcome aboard, Barbus. We've kind of thrown him into the deep end a little bit, but I'm sure he'll do fine with the support of his colleagues. Yeah, the Brunel Mark II. Now, it's done a good job up till now, but before too long, we're going to have to start bringing up some pretty hefty components, and I'm not sure whether to just keep going with the ridiculous-looking fairings or build something a little bit bigger, a little bit more of a substantial launch vehicle. I'm still not sure. I'll have to decide that one between episodes. Once in orbit, our crew can begin the task of extricating the latest piece of the jigsaw puzzle from the rest of the rocket before making their way over to our space station, the Socrates. And whenever you're near the space station at the moment, the clock in the top left-hand corner is a solid yellow, which means the physics engine is having a little bit of difficulty keeping up with all the components. So I don't think we need to wait for the Galileo to get back to bugger our frame rate. I think we just need to keep building the rest of this craft. Anyway, we arrive at the space station and things aren't too bad just yet, so it's time to get on with the task of attaching this last of those 3 fuel tanks. Once again, we have to find somewhere to temporarily store that spare docking adapter. This time we do it on the side of that structural component before bringing that fuel tank around and docking that onto the last of those 3 large docking ports. Once again, our Kerbals are not hanging around. They grab that spare docking adapter before making their way down to, hopefully, a rendezvous with the KSC. Now, we've tried this God knows how many times, but I've sort of compiled and collated all the previous attempts, and I think I've got it just about right with this one. So we make our deorbit burn and head on into the atmosphere to find out for definite. The early signs are promising, but we might have just overshot it. I try to use the command module as best I can to try and steer us closer back towards the KSC, and in the end, we only just touched down on the ground at the KSC. I'm not done here, though. I think I can do better than that. But anyway, yes, that's all our construction for today finished, but there's one last thing I want to take care of. So finally we find ourselves here with the Galileo, currently hurtling towards Kerbin at something in the region of 3 kilometers per second, about 24 days away from its encounter, and this is the perfect opportunity for us to double check that everything is going to plan and to see if it needs a course correction. Checking on the map view, and it becomes apparent that, yes, we will need to perform some sort of manoeuvre. As things stand, we will be going the wrong way round Kerbin, so, yeah, we need to get that sorted as soon as possible. I fire up the RCS thrusters, hoping we can manage it with that, but no such luck. We're virtually out of monopropellant. I've used most of it in our manoeuvres around Moho, and we need the rest of it really to actually dock with the Socrates, so that's out. We get the Galileo turned around, we fire up those engines to burn retrograde, and that does the job just fine. We also flip the Galileo over, get it pointing towards the anti-normal node, and perform a bit of a burn there, just to bring our periapsis marker down, make sure our orbit isn't too inclined when we arrive. So that will be all for today, everybody. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please consider liking, subscribing, maybe even following me on Twitter, link in the description. Next time, we've got to carry on with the construction of that new craft, because the way things are going, I think, yeah, definitely we need this thing away from the space station when the Galileo gets back. So a little bit of a race against time, but not too desperate at the moment. But for now, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time.